So today I'm going to show you how I made my new song, All Night, featuring Courage My Love. So let's take a look, yeah? So right off the bat, a little backstory to how this song was written. Courage My Love had a little demo with some vocals and lyrics and a guitar part, and they sent that over to me via electronic mail. I listened to it and I was like, hell yeah, I could with that. So the first thing I did was drag the guitar part into here. And originally how they sent it to me, it was just a chord per half note, like this. Check this out. So the chords were awesome, but I wanted to get this syncopation, so it's just got a little bit of that schlumpy schlump. So I did a little bit of slice work, ended up putting the chords on this rhythm here. And that became kind of the harmonic rhythm throughout the whole song. The whole song is based on this. That's where the bop comes from. And then I reamped it just to give it a bit more kind of fuzzy gristle. Also a little bit of chorus and a very, very subtle tremolo that gives it this fluttery effect. This kind of pushes air in a pulsating way. Rolled off some of the super low so that it wasn't too muddy, just make sure it had a nice present full body, like a nice dark chocolate compression, and a nice roomy EQ that made it feel like it was kind of in a, a nice wooden high ceiling space, but not too cavernous. We're not talking cathedrals here. So there we go. That's how I laid the bass fundamental instrument of this track. The instrument that all the other production details just ride on top of, that main guitar part. And I got the vocals up here. So this lead right here is sang by Mercedes.
Let me read between the lines, love.
Hell yeah, go up and sing.
You everything that's mine, love.
So I got a nice 10K boost up here just to give it more breath and hissy type stuff.
Even if it takes all night.
Gating to get rid of quiet signals. Anything that falls below will just disappear. This is my kind of classic style of compression here. Pretty hard attack, hard release, hard ratio. So that the signal just becomes very smooth and limited, and you can just ride it to the top of how present it needs to be. It's the way to do it. Now for the higher sibilant sounds, I'm doing just a bit of de-essing. And you can see when de-essing is engaged when the yellow appears here. We've talked about de-essing a little bit. But basically this yellow would have been the output of frequencies above 3K, and because of the compression from above, which is 4:1, moderate, the new output ends up being where the blue stops. So what ends up happening is just sibilant sounds get compressed, and dark sounds that are already naturalized don't get touched. There's also a bit of delay, and a nice full-size 3.5 second reverb that just kind of rings after her phrases. Literally filling up the space. Moving along, I ended up putting one of the parts of the lead in its own little group here, and there's a duplicate that's an octave down, pitched down an octave in complex mode, and I washed it out with 100% reverb and a nice medium room size, big decay time to get this big, this kind of just echoey, weird, choiry ensemble version that gets to double the lead and just kind of fill up space in the background. It's just a textural thing. It's just a textural thing. Let's see what else we got here in terms of vocal textures, which there's a lot of in this song. This is an ad-lib that was sung, that same thing, just washed out with reverb and just became a textural thing that would happen time and time again just to create a whoa, what is that moment? And same thing here. This is something that was just sliced from the tiniest sliver of a vocal to make this cool, weird sound that just happens rhythmically at different times. And you hear it has two pitches. It has the E and also has the E. So it's pretty interesting that it's just chilling there. What else do we have here? This, I believe, is a reverse of this signal right here. So it gets to answer it in a whooshy, rushing way. Y'all know I love reverse vocals. That's nothing new for me or for music in general, but it sounds awesome, so I'm gonna keep doing it. Moving on, we've got a group here with a couple extra harmony bits. And these have a heavy chorus and reverb and compression as usual, but the chorus is just to give it width that surrounds the lead vocal. Alright, moving on to some of these synths. So the first synth entrance is this pre-chorus here. Even if it takes all night. And this is what I call a stabby pad. I call it stabby because it pulses. It was like, stabs you. It was like, and I did this with wavetable. And let's take a look at what's happening here. So this waveform is from Charcoal, and Charcoal has some very interesting practical waveforms, ones that you can really use. Like this one here ends up being like a 2-octave saw wave, this one ends up being like a 2-octave square wave. So I'm using sort of a 2-octave saw wave. And there's a bit of a fluffed attack, just enough to make it slightly vowelish. And the big thing here with this stabby is the LFO. So there's a triangle waveform LFO, and it's actually tilted forward. The shape icon lets you lean the tilt back, and notice what happened to the sound. Now all of a sudden it's va 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 va. But the other way where I had it right here, which apparently is negative 50% in shape, so that its attack is a little quicker than its release. It's just tilted forward a bit. You could kind of play with this to find the sweet spot of what you like. This is just full down saw. That's full up saw. This is really kind of a sweet spot in the middle, and it has just a nice pulse to it. It's not too harsh. It still has a vowel quality, but it pulses very nicely. And you can see literally what it's doing to the filter. It's like a little heartbeat. And simultaneously, while this pulsating is happening to the filter frequency, and most importantly, the actual amplitude of the signal. So you can see that happening in this matrix right here. LFO1, go down, is routed 100% to the amp volume. And you can even see how it's affecting the amp volume right here. And simultaneously, as the section builds, the frequency is opening up through automation. And that's really what's happening. And then there's a nice wide 3-voice noisy unison that gives it this big stereo spread and just nice gritty noisiness. And on the EQ here, I'm just scooping out a teensy bit of mid so that it just has a tad more clarity. And that's the delicate thing. You don't want to overdo that stuff because then it'll get too thin, but if it's too muddy, it won't have the right impact. So you just got to play with that. Moving on to the big hook synth. That big synth that just goes bah, 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 bah. Let's check it out. Woo! So this isn't too different from the stabby. It's just a pure simple saw wave. Nice wide, high amount of noise, unison, 3 voices, cutting the super lows. And the filter frequency is always rolling back down to 40%. But there's an envelope on it. So it kind of has a vowely, wow type thing. And a very gentle, soft 136 millisecond attack that once again is very pillowy. And down to the sub. Ooh, this is a strong sub. Sounds like he does squats and deadlifts. So this is one of those weird waveforms that you find as you browse through Wavetable. This one's called Amber. And my thing is, if it has some semblance to a sine wave, you're going to be able to do something good with it. But it's nice when there's a little bit of a weird tone to it and that it's not like every other sine wave sub. So there's a heavy filter envelope on this, and it's sitting down at 50 hertz, which is kind of where a lot of subs want to sit. It's like a low, I'm going to take a guess, like F, I don't know, some big ass note. And the filter frequency resonance is all the way up, which just reinforces the low note. And you can see how that's affected in this spectral representation on the EQ. That's our fundamental, that's what we want lots of. And the amp has a nice decay so that the bass note dies away every time it sounds, and not an instant attack, so that it's not too harsh. And there's also the filter envelope here, which over 2.5 seconds goes from its peak back down to 50 hertz. So it just has a bit of vowel as well. Now the drums, let's check these drums out. Ooh, goddamn, that bass drum is no joke. So, as always, I'm mixing a lot of claps and snares. There's this big clap here, and all the stuff you can find on Splice, or in the Ableton collection. This has this kind of loose, jangly clap. This is a classic snap that my boys Penthouse made for their Splice pack that I use constantly because it's so good. Here's a kick from my boy Decap. Goddamn. So altogether these drums have a big, slappy, thick, knocking sound. And a lot of that comes from a very assertive use of drum bus. Let me show you what happens when I turn drum bus off. Well, for one, the volume greatly diminishes, especially the non-kick sounds, which have all been kind of normalized and pushed up into the limiter of drum bus. But notice what happens to the tone of the kick. Originally, this kick is very fluffy and predominantly low end. But with all this extra drive from drum bus, it actually becomes very punchy and boxy. So drum bus is a great way to transform drums, especially ones that lack presence, and really give them that punch and knock as well as the fluff that they possibly already have. And by the way, you could also add fluff to drum bus by introducing boom. This is without the boom. That's with boom. A good amount of nice low and fluff, which you could set the frequency of, is added. And once again, it's that 50 hertz thing. There's something special about 50 hertz. Now take a look at the piano roll. When the second verse starts, these hats and extra details come in. Now what I did is basically just 16th notes. With a few of these kind of trappy rolls that have escalating velocities, as I do a lot. But if you look closely, all of these hats are dripping behind the beat, which gives it this kind of lazy, schlumpy feel. It's that same schlump effect that I've talked about before. When you program your drums, if they ever feel too rigid or just too forward or on the beat or too clean, just try selecting a good region of them, like not all of them, obviously you can't shift them all over, but upper things like percussion and hats, try just nudging them to the left with the grid off. And likewise, try dragging your snares and claps ahead of the beat. As you can see, I'm doing a tiny bit of in this track, but this snap always sounds ahead of the beat. This snare, to be fair, is right on the beat. But once again, it's that schlump effect where you're mixing elements that are on the beat, such as your kicks, elements that are ahead of the beat, such as your snares, and elements that are behind the beat, such as your hats. So in verse 2, there's also this synth sound where it's kind of pulsating and filters changing up and down. So a lot of this was done with pretty involved automation. Let's take a look at that automation. Here you see me just manually drawing rise and falls of the filter. And this is not something that you could just program into the synth, you gotta just draw it. And I even went in and made sure that some of these had the right amount of curve. And to change curves, you hold down Option, and then you could just bend the curve. And curves are great to create acceleration. As opposed to a linear growth, acceleration has a lot more excitement because things happen more quickly as time passes. So it's like, whoa! And then on top of that, I drew in a few rhythmic things, like here. These synth notes sound just a little bit dry. They're not fully connected, to add to that pulsating effect. And the last detail you might have caught is, while most of this passage is played as a low pass, low pass, low pass, watch what happens. Low pass, and then suddenly it switches to high pass to get that trickly rain effect. That's kind of one of my favorite things about high pass. You start high and let it just fall down, and it sounds like rain just sprinkling onto the sidewalk. And then we get to the second hook, and the new synth layer that's added here is this arpeggio, which is just a square wave. The filter opened up not too high, looks like it did 7.5. And the arpeggiator setting I used is straight down, very, very simple. And I did 64th notes so it doesn't end up being so much a rhythmic thing, it's just like a textural sweep. Once again, it's that rain effect. And then you take a look at the actual MIDI here, and what I did is it's basically just the actual 7th chords, just how the main synth was playing them, but sprawled out over several octaves so that it could just tumble from the top note all the way down. Release, release, release. So it's also about that pulsing of sound and release, sound and silence. There's a lot of that going on in this track as well. We're covering a lot of the textural things. There's a reverse reverb here. That was just done on a vocal sound from Mercedes, I think. Let's take a look at some of the other vocals. So we got these beautiful harmonies here that Phoenix sang. And they're just very nicely gliding one position lower than the lead. And what I did to make these a little tonally different than the others is just push them real hard into the glue compressor soft clip. So they've got this nice fuzz, and to help balance out that fuzz, I just rolled off a little bit of the lows. So it just ends up being this thick kind of guitar tony sound. And they're panned pretty hard left and right so that they surround the lead once again. So moving on to my vocals here. Now after I sang this about 1 billion times and finally got it right and did the lightest amount of tuning on it, light tuning, your boy is getting better. Then I froze that so as to conserve CPU, and then I started taking a look at what I could do with it. So my normal thing is a bit of chorus. Once again, that high boost, gating the noise floor, hard compression, and a good amount of saturation too. I'm into this kind of thick, fluffy, saturated tone. Same thing here, de-essing. Teensy weensy bit of delay, almost no reverb at all. It's a very present signal in comparison to Mercedes's wet ambience spacious signal. There's a few other textures to cover here. There's a whole group of reverse drums being used here that make for really nice transition moments. This is a reverse of the bass drum that has reverb that you hear right here. So it's just kind of this echoey boom. And there's also, and this is one of my favorites right here. This is just the reverse of a nice kick that has a bit of ring, so it creates for this rushy effect. It's very nice for drops and downbeats, and it just kind of wakes you up. It's like, ooh, like a nice little face slap. Now for the last pre-hook, the one that leads up to the big final hook and the biggest drop, there's a few extra percussion things going on. There's this little percussion loop that I sliced up here, this kind of tribal stuff, with a filter that's just opening up, opening, getting bigger, 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 bigger. And that's accompanied by these more rumbly low toms. Same thing. Ooh, yeah. Now that's a drum circle. I bet they're making s'mores. All of this to create excitement and climax as it gets to this final drop. And my favorite texture of this final drop is this double riser I made, where one of them bends extremely upwards several octaves, 2 octaves, and the other one bends extremely downwards 2 octaves at the same time. And both of them are ran through a whole bunch of reverb and just a bit of tonal adjustment to create this effect here. Woo! One more time. Hell yeah. And I supplemented with one last fast riser here. This one's more of a square wavy sound. As you can see, the waveform is actually very bizarre and eclectic, and it just sweeps up very fast with some ring. And here's a sound that I've used before as well. I call this a meow, or just like a sigh. Just more textures to add size to the final moments in the song. In general, a lot of my productions have this big climactic arc where they start with a very simple introduction to a song, and then it builds, and then it kind of roller coasters down, and then it builds a little bigger, and then it roller coasters down, and then finally at the end, it's just all in. It's kind of a interesting way to keep interest throughout a song, and all coming from the same simple idea. I mean, once again, this all came from those same 4 guitar chords and top line. Now the last thing I wanted to show you, and this is a new development of my production style that I just started using a few months ago, is a tiny bit of multiband compression on my master channel, which is tucking in the mids between 200 hertz and 1 kilohertz. Now this is very interesting because it has a big, pretty dramatic tonal effect on all instruments. So it ends up replacing a lot of the low mid scooping that I used to do on individual channels, and now I just do it as just a master bus thing. Now notice what happens when I take it off. Wow. Drastically different. Suddenly it becomes so much more obese and opaque and thick and less clear. So this is something I've been playing with now. It really streamlines the tonal adjustment process of producing and makes for just a very nice tone that still has a lot of punch and nice top end and plenty of mid still. Like with any adjustment in art, when you gain one thing, you lose something else. So in this sense, I'm gaining clarity at the expense of a tiny bit of punch. You know what? I'm okay with that. That is an in-depth look of how I made the song All Night, featuring Courage My Love. Check them out, check out the song, and have fun exploring this project and making new creative sounds with it. As usual, so much love for watching. Stay sweats, y'all.